Greetings, book lovers everywhere, conservationists and kindness advocates too. I'm E-Train, and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm a 12-year-old literacy and kindness advocate, podcast host, and interviewer. And today, I am so excited to get the chance to talk to my next guest on my Care for Our Watersheds podcast series. And today's guest is very special because not only is she someone who's out there looking out for our watersheds and advocating for the environment in the process, but she also happens to be someone who's local to my community. Today, drumroll please, I am speaking with the Assistant Research Specialist in the Center for Watershed Sciences at the University of California, Davis. That's right, I am talking to someone who was featured on Science Friday for her science contributions taking place in my local watersheds. She is so cool, and I'm so honored to have her. Please welcome Miranda Tilcock to E-Train Talks.
Thank you so much for having me. This is absolutely wonderful, and I love that you are doing this.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, because I know that you are doing so much to not just help our watersheds, but also spread awareness in general. And my first question for you is, can you just tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up in this profession of caring for our watersheds?
Absolutely. You already gave me an amazing introduction, so it's going to be hard to follow that up. But like you said, I am a researcher at the Center for Watershed Sciences. So yes, I work in watersheds. And I went to school at UC Davis, where I received both my undergraduate, my bachelor's degree, and my master's degree from there in ecology or fishery science. And I was always kind of obsessed with fish growing up. Fish were kind of my thing. And I lived next door to a creek, and I was always in that creek looking for fish. And I didn't realize it at the time as a kid that I was basically doing fish surveys. And then I found out later on in my life that me looking for fish could actually be turned into a career option. And so then once I found that out, I was so excited. I'm like, someone could actually pay me to look for fish, which is something I already did for free anyways. And so I went to school for it, and I went and got my master's degree. And that's basically what I've been doing ever since. Is I'm still looking for fish, albeit in different ways now, where I study salmon on floodplains particularly, and I look at their eyes and I reconstruct their life history using eyes and isotopes or the chemical fingerprints in our environment.
Wow. Now, it's really a bit fishy if you don't like to study fish, so I know, I had to place that pun in there.
Always. We come from a long group of puns at my work, so we love them.
They are the best, and your job sounds so interesting and also just mind-blowing, like the fact that you can retrace a salmon's whole life story just from looking in their eyes. I mean, I guess that really means this, like, you say the eyes are the window to the soul, and I guess that is really true when you're talking about salmon. So
yeah, we like to say that the eyes are the window to their stomachs, because it is like it's like a diet journal for them. And if you understand the diet and the environment, then you can retrace their steps through what they eat. So that's what is it? Their eyes it's in the eye of the beholder. So the salmon life is in the eye of the beholder, is what I'm trying to say.
that is so cool. And I love the fact that you're helping our watersheds and also figuring out a lot about salmon, which are a super interesting and also just amazing. I'm saying amazing.
They're an amazing and important fish here in California. Absolutely. Yeah. They're iconic. Everybody knows salmon jumping up the waterfalls and bears catching them. So salmon's a species that everyone's familiar with, and it's an easy one to study because of how much people love it.
So can you just tell us what a watershed is? And there are many different definitions of the word watershed. So can you just tell us what a watershed is and why we need to protect them?
Yeah, watersheds can mean lots of different things. And like you said, there are lots of different definitions out there. I like to think of them as being the area of land that drains rainwater or snowmelt from one location, such as a stream, and then out until the end. And the watershed is going to be everything from beginning to end of that river. So the Sacramento River watershed is one of the biggest here in California, that starts up in Northern California and comes through here in Davis. And our watersheds are super important because, they supply our drinking water. There's also the water that we are using to water our crops. So California grows a lot of different food. and we want to eat that food, right?
Yeah.
Particularly, all those like delicious avocados and fruits and rice and everything like that. And so we need our water supply to be able to water these crops. And then the watersheds are also really important for biodiversity. They're important to the environment, but then people also just enjoy being in them. People like to go fishing, people like to go boating or kayaking, what have you, in these environments. And so you can think of the watershed as being really important because it's providing a lot of benefits for us in so many different aspects of our life, from just our day-to-day life, but also to our recreation life, but also just keeping our environment healthy as well.
Well, watersheds are super important, but another thing that really needs to be shined a light upon is the fact that I looked this up, so this is not fake information. Approximately 77% of people don't know where their natural water comes from. And that is just mind-blowing to think about. Because, well, that basically shows that nobody really knows what a watershed is, despite the fact that our entire world can basically define as a watershed. Our parks, streams, rivers, canals, well, not lakes, they are a big part of them, but they're not necessarily a watershed. Anyway, it's just really mind-blowing that our entire world is something, yet not nearly enough people know that it is something, what it is.
So, yeah, especially with how readily available information is out there. It's amazing how some of these things kind of really fly under the radar, even though they're so important to our day-to-day life. That's why it's so great that people like you are recording things like this to help kind of raise that awareness.
Well, thank you. And people like you are the ones that are really teaching kids like me. And speaking of kids like me, what can kids do? Because I know that the little things really count in the long run when it comes to saving our watersheds. What can we do to really make a difference and kind of make a positive impact?
There's lots of things that everyone can do day to day, not just kids. There's the basic water conservation aspect that people can do, like making sure you're not in the shower for a super long time, or even as simple as when you're brushing your teeth, you keep the water turned off when you're rinsing your mouth or something like that. Having drought tolerant plants in your garden. So talking to your parents and helping them figure out like what kind of plants can we have in our garden that don't use up too much water. And in the same way, we're not using too much, fertilizer or chemicals that can be then drained into our watershed. Also being careful with your pets when you take your pets out, or your dog out and about, if you have one, you making sure that they're not being destructive to the natural wildlife that's out there. So there's lots of little things that people can do day to day. But I think for me, the biggest one, like we were just talking about, how very few people seem to understand where their water supply comes from. I think the biggest thing that people can do is educating themselves and learning more about the world around them, because it's so important to understand the environment that we live in, especially as the environment is constantly changing. And I think the more you learn and understand your watershed or anything around you, the more you're going to care about it. And the more you care about it, then the more you can do to take action to help protect it and save it by creating that awareness. And if you get enough people involved, then that's what's going to help make positive change in our world. And so there's lots of little things you can do, but I think what you're doing is I think my top tip is the education part.
Well, thank you for that. And it really is so shocking that we have all this information at our disposal with the internet and, of course, books, but not nearly, I asked my friends before this project if they knew what a watershed was, and I was still just really discovering what the word even meant. None of them knew. So, with misinformation being a huge, I guess, burden of the internet, there's still that real information out there, and we gotta find it. And
exactly.
My next question for you is one that's really timely, especially in the Northern California area and kind of California as a whole. So this past winter, we have had torrential rain starting on New Year's Eve, and my mind was kind of blown because I'd never I've seen some rainstorms, we've had some bad hail, some thunderstorms and lightning, but that was about 18 consecutive days of rain, and a lot of it was downpouring, and power was out for a long time, and because of that, there was flooding. So how does flooding affect our watersheds? And I also learned that how does it affect our watersheds? And I was kind of just transitioning into the next question without even realizing it.
No, no worries.
Yeah.
I think that's a great question because I think what's something that's so special and unique here about the Central Valley of California, where we live, is that we have what are called bypasses that are located here. We have the Yolo bypass, and that's the one that if you were driving to Sacramento from Davis, that's what you see as you go over that overpass. There's also the Sutter bypass, which is further north. And what's interesting about these is that these were actually constructed in the early 1900s, and they effectively act like giant bathtubs. And what happens is that when you get a lot of rain, like what we saw, then the river fills up and this water can now spill and pour into our bathtubs that we created. And that way that can catch all that water for us and prevent places like the city of Sacramento from flooding. If you look up Leland Stanford, he was a governor here in California back in the 1800s. There's actually picture depicted of him in the newspaper of him having to take a boat to his inauguration because the city of Sacramento was underwater. And that was before our bypasses were built. And basically the response to all that water happening on a regular basis was to build these bypasses. And over the years, these bypasses have become a lot more than just flood control. So right now they act as flood control. If you go across the bypass, you can see it's full of water and looks beautiful. It's lovingly called the Inland Sea. But they also are really important because a lot of food is grown there in the summertime when they're dry. But then they're also really important in the wintertime, like right now when there's water, for lots of waterfowl and migratory bird species. The Yolo bypass is actually along the Pacific Flyaway, which is an important migratory bird route. So you'll have a lot of migratory birds that will have stopover sites here in the Yolo bypass. So you can see lots of amazing birds in the wintertime that you would normally wouldn't see unless you visited other places. It's also really important for fish like salmon. So I'm always thinking from the salmon perspective because that's my personal favorite. But the Yolo bypass is a really important rearing habitat for salmon. And because there's lots of food available on these floodplains for them. And so they can grow really large, really quickly, essentially packing a lunch for themselves before making their way out to the ocean. And if they can make it to the ocean at a larger body size, then the more likely they are to survive that first year. And if they can survive that first year, then the more likely they are to survive the next. Yeah. And so you have these flooding that's taking place. It's kind of a controlled flooding that's taking place that's happening right now. And so right now, what you see out there is you have a lot of probably really happy fish out there on the bypass that are eating lots and growing large. But it's also protecting our communities as well by being able to fill up our bathtub with water. I kind of forgot your question now that I've been talking. So, did I answer it effectively?
You did pretty much answer it.
Okay.
And I've driven over that overpass so many times, and I never really thought about the impact that it had on not just animals, but also our communities as a whole. And what's very saddening is that over the past 100 years, 90% of the wetlands in California have
disappeared. Yeah.
We've built over them, and that's heartbreaking. And because of building over these bathtubs, these wetlands, we're seeing a lot more problems with, flooding, because there's not really, we built over these rivers and these wetlands. I'm going like this.
No worries.
And I'm just curious, is there a way to really get these rivers and wetlands back, mitigate the problem, and find a way to really restore the watersheds that we really need in these big cities?
That's a really tough one. I don't know if there's a way for us to ever really go back, and restoration works wonderful when that's a possibility. I think a lot of times what we have to do now is think about reconciliation and working with what we have today in today's environment. And so for us, we know that places like the Yolo bypass are really wonderful for fish communities and that they can hold water for us. And one project that they're doing is they're putting a notch in the weir, which is basically it allows the Yolo bypass to flood more frequently so that fish can have access to it. And so that's a way that we are trying to take management actions. And so instead of restoring more wetlands, we're just making our wetlands more accessible during times when they might not be. We've also are looking at different projects for fish where we do have a lot of wetland habitat that is on what's called the dry side of the levee. And so these are the levees that were built on the river. And a lot of that flooding has occurred because those levees have failed and because they were maybe not constructed very well. But for the wetland habitats that do exist on these dry side of the levees, we do have ways of flooding them up and building that really effective food web and then pumping that out into the river. And so in a way, instead of bringing the fish to the wetland, we're trying to bring the wetland to the fish. So that way we can make a healthier river system for all the animals that are in it that are no longer able to access. And so it's up to kind of, us researchers to kind of get creative with these management solutions to see what we can do, because restoration is not always a possibility. We can't build over the city of Sacramento and turn it back into a wetland. Things like that are not possible anymore, but we can get creative and there are still creative solutions out there that are available to protect our watersheds and still have lots of benefits to the animals that need them.
Thank you so much for joining me today. You are a hero, a water hero. And thank you for all that you do, because it really is so important to shine a light on topics like preserving our watersheds, wetlands, everything that comes to water. And also keep having fun with your salmon buddies.
Absolutely.
And keep shining a light on topics that need to be discussed and are rarely discussed, because it is beyond just, it's important.
Absolutely.
And keep being amazing watershed loving and saving you.
Well, I would say you definitely should keep up the good work that you are doing, because I think educating and talking about these subjects is the best thing ever. And that's about the one step that I think everyone should take, is to learn as much as they can about the world around you. And so I commend you for doing that and making this podcast.
Well, thank you. And I'm so honored that I had the chance to not just speak with a watershed expert, but also one from my community, because that's kind of what this whole project is all about, because it all starts with helping your community. And thanks to your insights, I have more ways to help my community. And now all of you, through this podcast, maybe you can stand up and make a difference, whether it's starting a podcast like me or going out there and looking in salmon's eyes. So keep on reading, keep on advocating, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.